Hello, lovelies! The most wonderful time of year has finally arrived, which of course puts me in the mood for some baking. So today I'm being sponsored by Hersheys and their brand new Hot Cocoa Kisses to bring you 3 irresistible cookie recipes that are bursting with seasonal flavors. Starting with these chewy, chocolatey, hot cocoa crinkle cookies that simply have to be tasted to be believed. Now, each of these decadent delights is topped with Hershey's new Hot Cocoa Kisses, which are made with Hershey's classic milk chocolate, but filled with marshmallow cream, so they taste a lot like drinking a cup of hot cocoa. But you'll want to get them fast because they're only here until Christmas. For this recipe, we'll start by mixing up our dry ingredients. So I've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, 1½ teaspoons of baking powder to give these lots of lift, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt for good measure. I'll whisk all of those together until they're very well combined, and then I'll set them aside and get to work on my wet ingredients. I am starting with 1 cup of room temperature butter. Always nice to make sure your butter is at room temperature. It makes it much nicer to beat. To my butter, I'm going to add 3/4 cup of granulated sugar and 1/2 cup of brown sugar. Always great to use a combination of both sugars in these recipes. You get a really good texture. I'm going to beat those together until they're nice and light and fluffy, and then I'll go ahead and add 1 large egg and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now that is the beginning of something beautiful. Once all of that is mixed together, we're gonna go ahead and add our dry ingredients to this mixture like so. And we're just going to gently beat this up until it starts to form a dough. At this point, this cookie dough is already delicious, but if you wanna take these cookies right over the top, allow me to recommend adding some mini chocolate chips at this point. We're just going to fold about 1/2 cup into this. That way we are getting chocolate on chocolate, and wait for it, there's going to be even more chocolate. Now that our dough is formed, it is time to bring this all together. For this, I'm using my handy dandy cookie scoop. Now this is not essential in this recipe, but it definitely comes in handy, especially because we're looking to make uniform 1-inch balls. And all I'm gonna do is gently roll the dough between my hands until it forms a ball. And then just before placing it on my parchment lined baking sheet, I'm going to roll it in my icing sugar like so. This will help give our cookies a really pretty snowy effect, and of course add just a touch more sweetness. This is such a great job for the kids in the kitchen. They can basically roll all their own cookies and then get carried away in the icing sugar. What is not to love? Once I've got all of my cookies laid out on a parchment lined baking sheet, I'll get them into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 12 minutes or so. When they come out of the oven, they are super, super soft still, and that means it is time to add our Hershey's Hot Cocoa Kisses to the top of each, which are all filled with marshmallow deliciousness. And all we're gonna do is basically nestle one into the center of each of our cookies while the cookie is still hot, fresh from the oven. Voila, we're basically gonna get these to a cooling rack, let them cool for at least 5 minutes before diving in. Good thing I left myself a little extra kiss. What you end up with are the chewiest, chocolatiest, most delicious marshmallow-filled cookies you've ever tasted. So good. Next, we're whipping up a batch of my chewy butter pecan cookies. Now, butter pecan is one of my very favorite flavor combos, especially because it's got a hint of saltiness with a ton of great sweetness. They start once again by mixing up our dry ingredients. So I've got 2½ cups of all-purpose flour in my bowl. To that, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'll whisk those together until they're well combined and then set those dry ingredients aside while I once again get to work on my butter sugar mixture. In this case, I've got 1 cup of butter, 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, and 1 cup of brown sugar headed into my bowl. I'm going to use my hand mixer once again to beat this until it's nice and light and fluffy. Then I'll add my 2 eggs and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. I'm adding a lot of vanilla extract in this recipe, 2 teaspoons. Usually a cookie recipe only calls for 1. We really want a nice strong vanilla flavor in these cookies. Once those are all mixed together, I'll go ahead and add my dry ingredients and then continue to mix this until it forms a dough. Then it's time to add my pecans. In this case, I am using 1.5 cups of coarsely chopped pecans. I really like leaving them in nice big chunks because I think it makes for the best texture. Once my dough is ready, I am simply going to scoop it out onto a parchment-lined baking sheet. No need to be fussy about this. These are nice sort of rustic cookies. Oh my gosh, they look like little scoops of butter pecan ice cream. How excited am I? And then I'll get them into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 minutes or until they're nice and golden on the bottom. Now, you better believe when these babies get baking, your family will be pecan into the kitchen to see what's cooking. As soon as they come out of the oven, I am going to finish each off with a tiny pinch of flaked sea salt. This step really takes these cookies over the top because you have that salty, sweet perfection that I simply can't get enough of. Don't believe me? Try them for yourselves. You simply can't believe how delicious these cookies are. Finally today, I am sharing my spiced carrot cake cookie recipe. The amazing part about these cookies is that they actually stay soft and chewy, so they're honestly like little bite-sized carrot cakes. One of my very favorite things on earth. They all start once again by mixing up our dry ingredients. I've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour in my bowl. To that, I'll add half a cup of rolled oats to give these a bit more texture, as well as 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder to give them lots of wonderful lift. Then I'm going to get my spice on. I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon to this, a teaspoon of ground ginger, a half a teaspoon of nutmeg, and a half a teaspoon of cloves. It's going to seem like a lot of spice, but trust me guys, carrot cake is simply not carrot cake without a good amount of spice. To this, I'm also going to add just a half a teaspoon of salt, and then we'll whisk all of this yumminess together and set it aside while we get to work on our wet ingredients. Once again, I've got a combination of 1 cup of butter, half a cup of granulated sugar, 3/4 cups of brown sugar, and I'm just going to beat those until they're light and fluffy. Then I'll add 2 eggs to this, as well as 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and mix those up until they're well combined. At this point in the game, we are ready to bring our dry ingredients into our wet ingredients. We'll continue to mix this until we have a nice thick dough, and then it is time for our add-ins. So I have got some shredded carrot. This is carrot cake after all. I'm also going to add half a cup of chopped walnuts. And then finally, we have got some dried pineapple. Now, a lot of people think of raisins traditionally in carrot cake. That is definitely a great option. But if you want something a little different, I say go dried pineapple. Great color, great texture, great flavor, really complementary with carrot cake. Once that's all folded together, we can go ahead and form our cookies. I'm doing that simply with my cookie scoop. Just going to drop these cookies one by one on a parchment-lined baking sheet. Then we'll get these into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 12 minutes or so. As soon as they're nice and golden brown, you can remove them from the oven, transfer them to a baking rack, and allow them to cool for 5 minutes before diving in. The texture of these cookies is unbelievable. You can see they're almost like cake inside. Trust me, you are going to adore these. You can eat them just as they are, but if you want to take them over the top, go ahead and add just a touch of cream cheese icing to each. You won't regret it. Lovelies, I hope you'll give all 3 of these seasonal cookies a try. And if you do, be sure to tweet me, Instagram me, or Facebook me a photo, because I always love seeing your kitchen creations. Keep in mind, all of these recipes are linked in the description box below, so you can find them there. And a very special thank you to Hersheys and their Hot Cocoa Kisses for sponsoring this video. They're only available till Christmas, so you'll want to enjoy them while they last. Finally, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because there's lots more deliciousness where this came from.